Okay, I hit record and I'm with Chuck Sambuchino. Um, Chuck, man, thanks for joining me. So you and I met. I had the privilege of speaking at one of your conferences kind of last minute.
That's true.
And
In Washington, D.C., that's correct. Yeah.
yeah, in DC. And it's funny to me how like there's these different pockets of the author world. And like I feel like a lot of times we kind of get isolated in our own pockets and we don't realize that like the world is much bigger than we thought it was. So that was the first time I had ever spoken to an agent. I think I'd ever even seen an agent, a literary agent in action.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so it was a because I came into this world and went straight indie. And so it was a really fun and kind of exciting, eye-opening thing in between. I didn't talk to the end of the day, but I came and sat at the whole conference because I was like, I didn't know such a thing existed. So I just sat at the whole conference and watched. I talked to probably 15 different authors that were there about like what they were hoping for, like what they were looking for. And um it was super exciting, man. It was great.
Yeah.
So
Thanks
I
for coming.
yeah,
Thanks for teaching.
yeah, well, and then you let me have lunch with the agents, and I spent all of lunch just picking their brains about like why they're agents, what they do, just trying to understand that world. And man, it was a great education. So I was pumped about bringing you on the podcast so that you know everybody else can kind of hear what you're doing and see what it is, and maybe it'll open up that world to other people too.
Sure.
So yeah. So to kick us off, talk to me a little bit about what your author journey's been. What's your trajectory as a writer looked like?
You mean like how I got started in writing or what I'm doing now? What do you mean?
Either or, whatever, just to help people get to know you a little bit, kind of what has life been like for you as a writer?
Okay. Well, I mean, the 60-second summary is that I've always liked to write. Most writers it's kind of born into them at a young age and started writing for the college newspaper, started writing plays in my 20s, got a job as a newspaper reporter in my 20s, started writing for local magazines in my Cincinnati area. And then I got hired by Writer's Digest when I was in my 20s and worked for Writer's Digest for about 12 years, started out
Wow.
the magazine side of things, then moved to the book side of things, got on the online education and social media side of things, worked for them for about 12 years, basically writing books, reference books on writings, but also getting out, teaching people, writers' conferences, online education, teaching people how to get published, get your agent, that kind of thing. Edited the guide to literary agents for a long while. And then as of 2017, which is this podcast was 7 years ago, I left Writer's Digest and I've been doing the same thing on my own for 7 years now, which is just online, which is just education for writers. And
Yeah.
so now I plan writers' conferences all over the United States, sometimes in Canada, and I help people learn how to get published, learn how to books get published, how to promote their work, and give them one-on-one opportunities with agents who are actively seeking new writers. So that's anybody who doesn't know me. That's the quick bare bones story.
Yeah, your blog is pretty amazing. Again, I had never encountered it before till I came to your podcast, which it's got a huge readership. I think you say in your bio like 350,000 at one point, people kind of
Yeah,
engaging.
but no, but just to be clear about that, like when I was working for Writer's Digest,
Okay, gotcha.
I edited the Guide to Literary Agents blog, which at that time was one of the biggest blogs in publishing.
Yeah.
That was great, and I did that for about 10 years, and it was really cool. But I mean, obviously, I no longer edit that
No,
blog.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but you've transferred it into your own personal blog, which I was reading through is really nice. It like introduces literary agents in a very cool way. You got super helpful articles on there about like how to do certain things. I was really inspired by it. I was like, oh, this is something I need to just start following because it's interesting.
We're working on it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what what drew you like when we talk about like the world of literary agents and like being published in that what people call the more traditional sense, which I don't like I get where that term comes from. I don't know that it describes it well. Um what do you enjoy about that world? What do you like about that world? Like what do you find about that world that's a positive place for authors?
Well, I mean, the upsides of traditional publishing, which is what I specialize in, is that exactly what you think it is. If you get a book published by a literary agent, it's got a publisher attached to it that's got a name, whether that's Penguin Random House or Disney Hyperion or whatever it is, that's
Mhm.
cool. Your book is typically released in bookstores nationwide, which is cool, even if it's only for a very limited amount of time. You usually get a publicist assigned to you for a
Hmm.
limited amount of time who can help get you publicity and press and coverage. That's very cool. There's no upfront costs or fees. Everyone's working for you for free. These are all the upsides of traditional publishing. And at the same time, I don't think any of those are surprises to your listeners, because I mean, like those are the kind of the common sense upsides to trying to find an agent, getting an agent, that agent getting you a book deal, and your book being released in bookstores.
Yeah, I think that the surprise to authors is typically like if we ask like, yeah, what's the benefit to a traditional publisher, they'll talk through those. But I think the surprise is the realization that you don't have those if you don't go with a traditional publisher. That seems to be the like, wait, oh, I didn't think through the fact that if I didn't go this way, those things have disappeared. And that's
Yeah,
now around.
and also one of the things that one of the ugly truths that people don't like to talk about is that if you say you got your book published by Atria or Macmillan or Holt or Disney Hyperion or Viking or whatever, no one is going to question if it's good. They might
Yeah.
buy it, might not buy it, but no one's going to be like, I doubt this book's any good. No one would ever say that. Versus if they find out that you publish it yourself because you told them or because they just did a little research online, they're always going to be wondering, is the book have any quality? And it's a valid question because self-published books run the gamut from absolutely terrible to this is amazing, you know?
Hmm.
And so that's something that I think indie authors don't typically consider. And yeah, plus just, you know, if you're an indie author, what is your plan to sell your book? What is your plan to promote your book? Who are your readers? How are you going to reach them? If you don't have an answer for that question, people will not find your book by accident. It's not like
Yeah.
on Amazon. People are not going to find it by accident ever,
Yeah.
ever. And
Ever.
they don't realize that. They think, well, if it's out there and I put some keywords on it, maybe people are search, that does not happen.
No, it's not true. Yeah. And what you're saying is super true. I remember I was sending out copies of my fifth indie published novel to readers. And I was at FedEx, and the woman in line in front of me was like, oh, because I was holding the stack of books that I'm like getting ready to send out. And she's like, oh, that's neat. Did you write those? I'm like, yeah. She's like, oh, who published them? And I was like, well, I did. And she's like, oh, okay. And the look of the like, oh, okay, was like, oh, okay. So you're like a hobbyist, like screwing around with this, like not like an actual author. So it was that like what you're talking about in that like the bringing of weight to your reputation in being traditionally published, I think super is super true, and like just something that I think advances your career
Oh
long
yeah.
term in a way that like being indie published, you kind of have to earn your own cred to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so when you put on these events, you're and the events are called the writing day workshops, and you're doing them all over the country.
Yes.
You've got a whole bunch coming up this fall, which is super exciting.
Well, kind of the in. So I plan writers conferences. Most of the in-person writers conferences across the country typically happen in the spring. So
Okay.
I mean, like this past spring, there were 25 in-person conferences, and there was like, if I could remember them all, it's like Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, San Diego, Austin, Houston, Kansas City, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Chicago, Indianapolis, Tampa, Orlando, Georgia, Birmingham. What else? Two in Charlotte. There was Richmond. There was DC. There was Philadelphia, and so on and so forth. And there was Louisville, and there was Tennessee. Those are kind of the markets that we hit in spring of 2014. In spring of 2015, we don't even know where we're going to be, but a lot of those markets will be repeated. But pointing out what Jeff is saying here is that if you're looking for an in-person conferences, those are almost always in the spring because
Gotcha.
spring people are like the New Year's resolutions, and like we're going to go versus
That's so
summer.
interesting.
No one does anything in the summer, and then fall is okay.
Yeah.
But what Jeff is saying is that no matter what's happening, there is one online conference almost every month. So what he's saying is that September, October, November, December of 2024, there's one online conference every year, every month, and recurring. And the gorgeous part about the online conferences is there you can attend from home and they're easy, but
Mm-hmm.
also each one has more than 30 agents, which is cool
Yeah,
because
that's
when
very
you do an
cool.
in-person conference, you might have 15 agents there, you might have four, you never know.
Yeah. What is an online conference? What does it look like to interact with an agent in one of those?
Just exactly like this. It's a
Okay.
Zoom or it's Google Meets, and you get there's a 15-minute block of time, and they're going to give you 10 minutes of that, so they can kind of log on and log off to the next one, and it's a 10-minute meet and greet like this. So
Okay.
we're just creating a one-on-one meeting through Zoom or Google Meets. That's all.
Gotcha. So I'm an author. I grab like, I'm going to say like I got budget to grab 3 of those with like 3 different agents, let's say.
Sure. Yeah.
What are your recommendations for picking the agent I talk to?
Well, the first thing is you're not going to have a ton of choices because you got to look for people who represent your genre.
Hmm.
So let's say we have 35 agents at a conference and you want to write memoir. Okay, there might be 7 that represent what you're writing. Picture book, there
Gotcha.
might be 3. Young adult fiction, there might be 14. So a lot of people don't necessarily have infinite choices. You're going to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a number of choices. Let's just say there's 8 people who represent what you're writing. Let's say it's a thriller. At that point, my recommendation is just read through their bios. You got 8 bios to read through. They're all pasted on the website. Is
Mm.
there something that calls to you? Is there something that doesn't call to you? Sometimes people are looking for specific types of that genre. Sometimes people are only looking for certain types of authors, specialized authors, and so forth and so on. You can read between the lines and you can see, is this person looking for actively seeking clients? Are they looking for this? They're looking for psychological suspense? Are they looking for stuff that's just set in the South? These little things will pop up.
Mm.
And if you can find anything that rules out an agent, just rule them out.
Gotcha.
But at the same time, it doesn't cost that much to meet with an agent. So lots of people just err on the side of caution and they say, well, I'm just going to meet with this person because this could be the opportunity I'm looking for. So yeah,
Nice.
people oftentimes will. It's interesting. People oftentimes will either sign up for too few pitches, thinking
Mm.
like, oh, one's enough, or they'll sign up for all they can, thinking I'm going to
Interesting.
maximize this chance.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's interesting to see what they do. It's oftentimes ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. It's the extremes. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. How much of my book do I need to have written before I talk to an agent?
Well, I mean, you got to have it all written. But I
Okay.
mean, that's the easy part. In my opinion, first draft's the easy part. The revision process, which takes, a lot of time, a lot of overhaul, a lot of drafts, and also you got to get other people's opinions on it. And that you can't rush them. You can't rush your beta readers. You can't rush your freelance editor.
Hmm.
That takes time too. And when they come back with their thoughts, you got to incorporate their thoughts. You got to understand it. So having it all written is just step one. The revision and overhaul and the rewriting process will take you a lot of time. And then when you feel like it's as good as you can possibly make it, then you can submit with confidence and hope for the best.
Nice. So I've heard the advice like, hey, just have a really solid first chapter and keep the rest of it flexible. And I'm hearing you're saying the opposite. Like, no, have a finished product before you get in front of an
Oh
agent.
yeah, I've never heard that piece of advice that you just
Okay.
gave. I would love to talk to whoever told you that and just and dress them down. But no, no, that's a fast way to get in first strike. The only time you really want to be flexible in writing is another different world totally, which is the nonfiction realm. Like
Hmm.
I write a lot of nonfiction, so I'll come in with a projected word count. First of all, the book's not written.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's like you write a few sample chapters and you have a projected word count, but every time you come in with a projected word count, the publisher's like, no, we got to do this, and they'll
Gotcha.
come in with their own like, we got to make it 15,000 words or 45,000 words, and you're like, okay, that's
Mm.
fine.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
where flexibility comes into play. But no, I mean, I think the dream scenario for a publishing house and an agent is to get a beautiful diamond work of art that they barely
Gotcha.
have to change at all, sell it, and make a lot of money. That's what they want to do.
Nice. Okay. That's really super helpful because I don't think a lot of authors, at least that I've engaged with, know that like, hey, you should have a finished product before you
Oh,
show up to an agent.
and it's got to be good. And no, there's no flexibility in it. The quickest way to getting rejected by an agent is submitting something and thinking an agent will help me fix the problems. That does
Gotcha.
not happen. That's not their
Okay.
job. That does not happen yet.
Interesting. So when I have that 10 minutes with an agent, what mistakes do you see authors making during that time? Like, what are the big things that we should avoid doing?
Well, I mean, just being so nervous that they talk and talk and talk, and they're kind of endlessly talking because they're so nervous. Uh, Let me see here. Not focusing on what makes their story special. Like we're all telling the same 11 stories over and over again. If you're writing a romance, they've heard the romance. They've maybe read 5,000 romance pitches. If you're writing, the Amish fiction, they've heard this pitch 5,000 times, whatever it is. What makes your story unique? Like what
Mm.
is the one little hook or interesting little blip or bleep or whatever it is that makes your story unique? You focus in on that. Um, People don't utilize X meets Y enough, which is, it's like Succession, but in the movie industry, it's Die Hard on the Moon. People don't use that enough, but really that helps. And immediately kind of is like, this is what it is. This is what makes it special and different and unique.
Mm.
Um, you need to, and when you meet with an agent for the 10 minutes, essentially what you're doing is you're saying your memorized query letter out loud in a very loose and conversational fashion. So as long as you got your query letter basically memorized in your head, you can't really go wrong. And then, think about what are the logical follow-up questions an agent would ask you after you talk for 1.5 or 2 minutes. They're going to ask you, tell me about yourself.
Hmm.
They'll ask you like, what do you think comparative titles are this for? What makes this story different from other stories in your genre? Or they might even ask how it ends. I mean,
Hmm.
logical follow-up questions. And have you practiced the answers to those? And that's
Hmm.
it. Yeah.
Gotcha. And I'm hearing you say that, like, in the end, the agent's looking for something that they think is going to take off in a market.
Well, yes, but they're also looking for stuff that they fall in love with. So it's
Gotcha.
either or. They either love the story or they think I can make money off the story.
Okay. Yeah. Um, let's say that I've pitched to, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 agents, and
Okay.
I'm
You
and
mean meaning
they've
through one conference or just through the internet?
through the internet for one conference and whatever, or I've queried,
Okay.
and I've been told no on the same book. How often, how long should I keep pushing a book before I move on to the next book?
Well, that's complicated. But the short answer is you want to exhaust all possibilities before you move on.
Hmm.
So if you spend a few months researching and building your agent list and you come up with 100 agents who might be interested in your book, you want to contact them all.
Okay.
That's the short answer. But my recommendation is when you put together your list, let's say for this example, it's 100 agents, you contact 25% of them to start. It's just
Yeah.
an arbitrary number. You want to do more, go ahead. But you send it out and you see what the response is. If you contact 25 agents and over the course of the next 2 months, you get no requests for more work, which basically is a rejection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that means that something's wrong and you have to fix it. So
Hmm.
don't come up with this mentality thinking, well, I'm just going to query the other 75. After you query the first 25 and you sit back and you tap your fingers and you realize nothing's happening, you have to realize that what you're sending is not working. And what you're sending is your query letter and your first pages, first chapters. One of these or
Gotcha.
both of these is failing you. It's almost always the writing. So you have
Gotcha.
to fix this and then submit again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how you give yourself the best chance. But the answer is that you keep querying the book for as long as you want. I mean, I had a writing friend, Kara, and she, I think, queried every picture book agent on the planet for her picture book. And they all said no over the course of several years. And then finally, one new agent popped up and she queried her and she got an agent.
Hmm.
Just that one person who fell in love with it. There is no time to give up. Don't give up. The
Gotcha.
whole thing is, but at the same time, when I say don't give up, I'm also saying if you submit something that's not ready, it's going to get rejected by everybody and anyone. So you want to submit work that you feel like has merit. That's all.
Yeah. Something I learned being at your conference is how important that first, like, hook couple paragraphs are.
Yes.
Would you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, you said it pretty well. In that an agent is looking to be pulled in on your first page, but even more so than that, your first paragraph, your
Hmm.
first even line, especially the first two paragraphs. Like you
Yeah.
got to do something to pull them in. The buzzwords I always throw out to readers are they're looking for trouble, problem, conflict,
Hmm.
intrigue, um, agency. Those
Yeah.
words I'm looking for, like trouble, problem, conflict, intrigue, agency.
Yeah.
And these are you want that immediately. A book can't get good, on page 4, page 44. It's got to pull you in immediately with something. So you got to take a swing on that first page.
Gotcha. I love that. I think you did an exercise at the DC conference I was at where you had live reads of people's first pages and you had the agents all say when they stopped reading.
It's very illuminating. Yeah.
Oh, so illuminating. Like, it was interesting to hear what they stopped on were things like, the name of this character is so hard for me to comprehend. I'm struggling over it every time. I'm not going to keep going. Or, like, you had 2 paragraphs of world building in the, like, you said a good conflict in the first paragraph, but then you went deep into, like, the android world building that, like, you totally lost me in the world building and I didn't get to paragraph 4. Like, it was just a fascinating way to hear people who, like you're saying, might read a 5,000 romance pitches, how they're looking at that first page
They
differently than we
dissect
are.
it. They dissect your writing quicker than you could ever think possible. And people might say something like, "I believe this to be unfair to me," and it's like it doesn't matter whether it's fair or not in your opinion. This is how it is.
Yeah.
So I want to educate you. Like your writing is being dissected very, very quickly, and here's how they dissect it. And it's very illuminating, and it's the centerpiece of the day. Everybody submits their first pages. Everyone who wants to submits their first page.
Yeah.
And we shuffle them, and we pass them out to all the agents, and then someone reads them. And as the agents, maybe there's 7 agents there, as they're reading their first page, if there's any point they would stop, they just raise their hand. And then there's a discussion about it. And that is like far and away the most popular session of the whole day. And people are saying, like, I hope my page gets chosen. I hope my page gets chosen. And I always say to them, like, yeah, I get that. And I would too. But at the same time, if you just listen to what they're saying on the other 25 pages that they read, you're going to learn immense amounts of knowledge stuff.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And yeah. If you really pay attention to what other people are doing wrong and how they react to it, you can take those lessons to your own writing.
Yeah, it was interesting. I sitting in the back, like I had my journal open. I probably took like 10 pages of notes, just listening to how they like, because there's definitely, especially the agents that you could tell had a lot of experience under their belt. There's definitely, they all had their systems for like, hey, this is how I'm getting through this really quickly and deciding whether or not I want to move on.
Yes.
It was just interesting to diagnose and listen to their systems and like what they were working on, like the mindset they were working on to get to that, like, how do I decide whether or not this is something I want to keep working on and invest time in?
Yes.
Yeah, so fascinating. When like an author's coming with an agent, are there any other, like, you've talked a little bit about some attitudes that authors come with that you're like, hey, that's something you need to get rid of? What are some other attitudes that you see authors showing up with when it comes to like approaching agents or the traditional publishing system that like you'd say, like, you got to put that down before you show up here?
I guess, but first of all, if we're just being honest, no writer who's truly got an attitude problem is going to listen to me or anybody else. That's my first thought. So
that's very true.
But the two attitudes that are obvious, and 95% of people who attend a conference do not have these. It would be arrogance and bitterness. And I mean, like, people come in arrogance and they think their work is hot stuff when it not necessarily is, or the bitterness of the fact that it's so darn hard to get a novel traditionally published, to get an agent, that they come in with a bitter attitude or an ego, and those are immediate turnoffs because signing with an agent is like a business relationship or a marriage. I've been with my agent personally now for 16 years, and we have to like each other. And if we don't, that's a problem. And so if you're hard to get along with, that's going to be a problem. But like I said, no one's going to listen to me. Yeah, people coming in with those attitudes don't even know they have those attitudes. So how are you going to get them to correct themselves? That's like, we can't help that.
I do think those attitudes are infectious, though. Like, I think, especially in the indie author community, there's lots of like, I wouldn't say rumors, but like kind of cultural tales that like are told about traditional publishing, are told about agents, that the more I see the traditional publishing world, the more I'm like, that's not true at all. Like,
no,
yeah.
I don't even know exactly what the tales are, but my guess is that you hear these outliers, or sometimes not even outliers, but straight myths. And it allows you to demonize this world and say, like, oh, we don't want that. We want to be published, which is fine. I mean, like, indie self-publishing is absolutely great, but you just have to be totally honest and realistic with yourself about the pros and cons and the realities and the challenges of it. And also, don't demonize traditional publishing. And if you're coming from the traditional publishing world, which is my side, I don't demonize self-publishing, and I understand what the pros and cons of traditional publishing are, because there are pros and cons. Me and my agent just sold a book, and they said it's going to come out 2.5 years from now, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's so ridiculous, But I knew what it is, and I'm not going to say, like, I understood what I was dealing with, and that's the deal I made. So be it.
Yeah. I think like one of those tales I hear all the time that I'd love to hear your opinion on is there are predatory agents who are like gonna talk to you about like, oh, I'll represent your book, but it's really just a scam to get money out of you.
Well,
do you see that in the industry a lot?
No, not really at all. And that's basically, like, there are scammer agents out there, but anybody doing the with basic common sense and basic research is not going to do it. Like, let me put it to you this way. If you were dating, common sense and the tiniest bit of research will help you not get ripped off by a scammer from Switzerland or Nigeria.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you found yourself single tomorrow, do you feel like when you got online you would send $10,000 via Cash App to a scammer in Nigeria. Do you think you would do that? And if you think, no, that's ridiculous, then you are fine.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
fine. This was the scammer agents was much more of a problem when I first started editing the Guide to Literary Agents, which at this point would have been like 17 years ago, because not a lot of agents had websites. So when you would Google literary agents on the computer, 2 of the first 10 results were pure scammers. And
Gotcha.
but now, I mean, Google has filtered those search results way out. If
Hmm.
you're using legitimate means to the most common means to research would be online websites like Agent Query and Publishers Marketplace and Manuscript Wishlist. If you were using anything like that, even Twitter, you will not come across these people. So just like if you're using legitimate dating websites and they're using legitimate agent websites, you're not going to come across anything. And I think really what happens is some very naive people get online and
Hmm.
they stumble into a scam and they think like everyone's going to fall for this scam for there's a prince, you know, over in Greece who needs my
Yeah.
money. It's like that does not happen. And
Yeah.
unless you know you're really just very naive, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I think there's a vulnerability that comes with like hopes and dreams too. Like, you
Okay.
get online, you're like hoping and dreaming for something, and it does make you vulnerable. But what I hear you saying though is that like that's probably a myth that existed at one point in time, and now has like doesn't necessarily exist in the same way anymore, but the myth still gets told. So it's
Yeah,
like,
I
yeah,
wouldn't say it's I just wouldn't say it's a myth.
okay.
I'd say really it came about because as the publishing as the internet grew bigger, you're talking about 2004, 5,
Hmm.
6, 7, 8, 9, around there. A bunch of literary agencies were not online. So people utilized this to get online, called themselves agencies, got $3,000 out of you, and then did nothing.
Yep.
Like that's it. But that day has passed. So
Hmm.
even if you are grossly naive and you're just using Google, like there should be a way for you not to fall into that. I mean, like when you get online and you Google something and you see that the first result is an ad, do
Hmm.
you click on it? Because if you do, like that's a problem, you know?
Yep.
And but if you don't click on the stuff like this, but no, that really is. I haven't heard anybody truly complain about scams in about 10 years.
Okay.
So back 2014, maybe even longer.
Okay.
No one's come up to, no one's asked this question at a
Yeah.
writers conference in a good 10 years because that's just outdated stuff. It's not a myth, it's just outdated.
That's really helpful to know. In your opinion, is there a difference between like agents operating independently versus agents that are part of a house? Or there's like a pros and cons to those that authors should look at?
Well, not really. Like my agent for the past 16 years has always operated independently. And I'm
Mhm.
very happy with her. Her name is Sorka Fairbank, not that it matters. But most agents are at
Okay.
agencies and they're grouped together. And the real advantage to that is that a group of agents will frequently bring on newer agents. And those newer agents are the ones who are actively looking to sign clients like you.
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of the benefit of an agency is that these established agents who aren't really looking for people bring on new people who are looking for you. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to sell your book or that they're perfect, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the big immediate thing I would say is kind of cool.
Nice. Um, what like authors will talk about like, oh, I only want to work with them. I only want to query agents. I only want to work with agents who have a track record of success. When you're
Okay.
talking about like new agents,
Yeah.
how do you weigh that? Like if it's the new agents that's looking for clients,
Yeah.
agents with success that aren't, like what's the kind of balance there and like what an author should be looking for and who they query?
Well, okay, if you're a writer, you can query anybody.
Hmm.
So there'd be 3 types of you're looking for any agent that is open to new writers, and you're going
Okay.
to find new agents, newish agents, meaning like 1 to 5 years of experience, and then you're going to be looking for experienced agents, say like 5 years plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, which do I query? Because I see the pros and cons of all of them. And my answer is just query them all. Query
Gotcha.
them all. That doesn't really matter because the worst thing that could happen is an agent offers representation to you and you consider it and you talk with them and you pray on it or whatever. And then at the end of the day, you just say no. Like that's the worst
Mhm.
possible thing that could happen. But new agents, the benefit is that they're actively looking for writers. Newish agents, which is kind of that sweet middle ground, they have some experience under their belt. They're also looking for new writers, and established agents have power, more track record, stuff like that. I will say this: that 10, not 10 years ago, it was 11 years ago now. 11 years ago, I got my first offer on for children's books from an agent. And
Mm-hmm.
I had my one agent, but she didn't write children's books, so I had to get a second agent. And I got two offers, and one was from a brand new agent at an established agency. So real agents, and she was kind of joining here. And
Mm-hmm.
the other one was from the top picture book agent in the country. And they both wanted me. And the established agent was like, listen, I'm good, come with me. Didn't really make too big of a push. The new agent made a real big push, and she's like, I'll represent everything you write, blah blah blah. I know I'm behind the eight ball to this other agent, but I want to
Mm-hmm.
do it, blah blah blah. And so we ended up not rolling the dice and just going with the established agent. She tried very hard to sell her book, and that didn't. And that kind of relationship that we had has kind of disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really talked in many years. Meanwhile, the new agent over here who represented me quietly over the past 11 years has become a massive powerhouse, massive powerhouse.
Wow.
So I don't have a long list of publishing regrets, because there's always, different past stuff where like that is far and away the biggest publishing regret I ever had. And
Mm-hmm.
it stems from this question, which there is no answer to, because you signed with the new agent because of the pros versus the cons, and that could happen. It could help you or not. You sign with the established agent, and it could help you or not. But in this
Yeah.
case, this particular case, I failed, and I don't think I did anything wrong. I'm just saying it did not work out.
Yeah, what I hear you describing is that, like, in all of these things, there's a future trajectory that's unpredictable,
Yeah,
and so you never know which
no,
way. Like, you can't say like this is a definite yes, this is a definite no,
you
because
never
it
know.
could really go either way.
Yeah, I mean, think
Yeah,
about it. Like you're trying to get an agent, and then joy of joys, you get an agent. Then the agent's got to sell your book. The chances of them doing that, last I checked, are like 40%. So I
okay,
mean, like you don't even know if they're going to sell your book, and
yeah,
then you have to write the next book or write the next book, and then maybe you hit that 40% and they sell your book, right? And now there's no guarantee where the book's going to go. I mean, most books that come out don't sell 5,000 copies. So
yeah,
in other words, they don't necessarily do bad, but they don't necessarily do good either, depending on what your definition is of good and bad. So you have to really love writing. I really, really, if you, especially if you want to write fiction, poetry, short fiction, short stories, you got to really love writing, because you have to take joy in the process, because there's no guarantee of an agent, there's no guarantee of a book deal, and even if you get a book, there is no guarantee that book is going to sell and you are going to make $5,000 off the book. There is
yeah,
no guarantee. So this is something that indie authors and traditional authors share at this core thing, is that you got to love writing, because at the end of the day,
yeah. There's no promise of return on this thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Eh, so you've talked a lot about like your relationship with an agent long term, and like your relationship with your agent with a long term. Um, should we be selling is it important to sell yourself as an author as much as it is to this manuscript? So for example, there's like a cultural kind of myth out there that says when I query an agent, I should talk about like, oh, I've got 5 books in the chamber, or I should talk about like, oh, I've got 7 books in the chamber. What's your thought on that? Stick to one book or query more than one, or where does that kind of land in your opinion?
Well, it's a good question. Let's just say you're contacting an agent. Let's say you sit down with an agent at a conference, or you just contact them over an email. You never have to mention the next book unless your first book is the start of a series or trilogy. If
Mm-hmm.
it's the start of a series or trilogy, there's a standard line, which is although this is a standalone work, I believe it could be the opening to a trilogy or series. Period. That's it. Now,
Gotcha.
if you're just writing, if you're just querying a singular novel, like a literary fiction novel, whatever it is, it's not part of a series or a trilogy, then you do not have to mention any other books, because it's assumed, always assumed, that you're writing the next thing. You don't need to say, by the way, I have other ideas.
Gotcha.
It sounds amateurish. I would not say that you have other projects, because once again, it comes off as amateurish. And then also, to your point, where it's saying I have 5 projects in the work, or I think I've got 7 projects in the work, the higher that number goes, if it goes past even like 2 and it
Mm-hmm.
goes into 5 or 7, then the writer comes off as scattershot and all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I've got 20 ideas for stage plays. It's like, we're not looking for 20 ideas. We are looking for one remarkable thing. Can you create one diamond? I don't care
Mm-hmm.
about 20 lumps of coal that you're turning into diamonds. I care about one diamond. Come to me when you got a diamond. So it just it doesn't help you. No, I don't think
Gotcha.
so.
What uh what about the opposite end of that spectrum? What advice would you give to somebody who's like, "Hey, I've been working on this book for 10, 15 years and I'm in my second life, right? Like I'm like 55 and
Wow.
I'm writing my book now after living a long life. And I just have this one book and I'm just going to write this one book. I'm not writing 10 books." Is that sellable to an agent?
Yes. I mean, there's two questions. First of all, so this example, is this person still writing it? Or
Yeah.
did they
Oh,
are they done?
I know a lot of authors that this describes.
Okay, if you've been working on your book for 10 to 15 years, then there's two reasons you can't get it done. Either you keep having major life crises or emergencies that are pulling you
Mhm.
away. And at some point, hopefully those will end and you can focus.
Yeah.
That I cannot control. But I mean, like, if you have time on your hands, even an hour a day, on average, 7 days a week, there is no reason you can't get your book done within 6 months. There's
Yeah.
no reason, period, besides the fact that you've hit writer's block or something like that. And
Well, these are the rewriters, man. These are the ones who are like, and I love them. I work a lot with them, but they're like, I've written this same chapter like 15 times, and I
oh,
finally am getting it right where I really like it.
well,
But
I
I'm
mean,
not going to write another book after this one.
okay, well, so I can't really help people who have been writing for that long, besides tell them get outside work, outside analysis on the work, like a beta reader or a
Yeah,
professional
yeah,
writer. But no, no, no. Like, that's not something I would advertise. If you're just writing one
mhm,
book, I would not advertise it at all. And an agent will not find that attractive. But ultimately, if you give them a beautiful thing,
yeah.
they're going to try to represent and sell it. And then they're just going to plead with you to write something else.
Gotcha.
And so the publisher will too. Like, if
Yeah,
you sell it and the publisher's like, hey, I like your writing style, there's money to be made, they're going to plead with you and the agent's going to plead with you. And at some point, your ego will bend, your ego and your bank account will bend to their pleas, and you'll write the next thing because you
gotcha.
want money and you want to be read. Of course, everybody does. And at some
Yeah,
point,
yeah,
they're going to throw something at you can't say no to.
yeah. That's really good advice. And I what I'm hearing you say is like, don't advertise the fact that this is your one this is your one thing to go. Go sell that book, but don't advertise that like I'm never writing another one after this.
And in real life, I've never seen, I've edited thousands of query letters, and I've never seen a query letter that said, by the way, this is my one and only book. No one's ever written that. It's not very
Gotcha.
realistic. But what people do write frequently, thinking it's like a good thing, is they'll say, this is my first novel.
Hmm.
And when people say that, I always say to them, explain to me, with God as our witness, explain to me how that line can help you. And there's a pause, and they kind of look down because they realize there's no way that line can help you. It's my first novel. It can only hurt you. It's
Yeah.
either neutral or it makes you look like, hey, I just got started and I'm having fun and woo, I'm gonna write a book. So it can only hurt you. I would not recommend writing that.
Okay. Let me pitch to you another scenario that is like common in our community, which
Okay.
is I started as an indie. I've written like 7 or 8 books. I'm mid-listing at best. Right? Like I've got a small group of people that read my books, but I'm pulling maybe like $200 a year on the books that I've written. And
Okay.
I'd like to try trad. And I've
Okay.
got a new idea. I've got a new book, a new series. How do I approach an agent with that kind of history behind me?
I wouldn't mention your self-published books at all.
Okay.
If the new book is truly independent and unique and has nothing to do with the old series, there's
Hmm.
no reason why you can't just contact them straight up and just pitch the work. At
Okay.
some point, when you're going to disclose it later, and but yeah, I wouldn't mention it at all. If 200 sales a year is not a lot, I would
Yeah.
not consider that to be mid list. I
Yeah.
mean, mid list to me would be like people saying selling anywhere between 2,500 to 10,000 copies a year, depending
Yeah.
on how many books you have. I'm trying to think of it, what traditional publishing would consider mid list.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
just means someone who's bringing in money, but is not a bestseller or rich.
Yeah.
So I would say just hide that fact, hide it, because it shouldn't have anything to do with what you're querying.
Okay. How important is like putting social media stats, clout stats, like um the following that maybe you've started to build? How important is that in these conversations, these 10-minute conversations with an agent?
It's not important. I mean, if
Okay.
you have something truly notable, something. It's interesting you ask this, because there's rare agents out there who will talk about the importance of your followers and your subscribers and social media, and that can get really dark really fast, because not only is that difficult to gain such a readership following, but also in addition to that, the numbers that they want are ridiculous. Like, I was just at a, we're getting off track. The answer is,
No,
if you're,
this is great because this is something that really depresses a lot of authors because they're like, I don't have 100,000 people in TikTok following me. Do I even query an agent?
no, no,
Right?
no.
Like,
Well, I was getting a little bit off track. There's
okay.
a two-part answer, and I apologize. Forget what I just said.
No, you're right.
For people who are writing fiction, my answer is generally it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Your social media following and your subscribers, your readership, that can only help you, but it can't hurt you. It doesn't matter. Agents really are only looking for a beautiful piece of writing. That's all fundamentally that they want. Now, if you have a social media following you can bring to the table, it only makes you more valuable. It will only increase the amount of money you can get upfront for the books, and that's good. Now, on the nonfiction side of things, your platform and your ability to sell the books and your publicity value, that is imperative. If you don't have the ability to sell 10,000 copies of your book over time, they don't care what you're writing about. It's a book about dog health, or it's a book about how to raise an autistic child. It's a book about starting an organic garden in your backyard. It's a book about a history of the Seattle Mariners. No one cares. No one cares unless you have that ability. So, and that's where it gets very subjective. People are like, how many followers do you need? And what about the platforms? And it varies widely, and it's very crazy. Like, I was at a writers conference in the spring in Raleigh, and she said, oh, an agent contacted a publisher and said, my client has 250,000 Instagram followers. And the publisher wrote back and said, but how many TikTok followers? I mean, like, imagine that. Imagine 250,000 Instagram followers and someone coming back with like but excuse me, may I, if I may, how many over here? But that is not the fiction realm. You hear that, and that's something where an indie author could hear it, and it could just twist their brain, and they could, why even bother? But they don't know the context of it. And meanwhile, I was at a conference in Seattle, and they asked even a simpler question, which was this: would it help if, when I'm contacting an agent and pitching my novel, I had won awards or I had short stories published in anthologies? And the universal answer was generally no, it doesn't help. And I was like, wait, what? You're telling me that if you get a short story published in an anthology or Chicken Soup for the Soul or, Glimmer Train, Alaska Quarterly Review, they don't really care? And generally they were like, no, not really, because we're focusing on this project. So that is good news, I guess, in that the work you create is paramount. It's paramount. And people are always looking for a reason to override that. Like, oh, it's because I don't have followers. Or, oh, it's because I don't know anybody, or I've never had anything published before, or it's because I live in Hawaii. And it's like, no, as far as I can tell, asking the agent's point blank range, that doesn't matter at all. That doesn't matter at all. Can you write something that is truly magnificent? And most people cannot get to that level because it's so difficult and it takes so much time.
Thank you for letting me just throw questions at you, by the way. I know I'm just like peppering you with weird.
Oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's fine. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. This is like, I'm like super excited because it's like all the questions I wanted to ask, I'm just going to throw at you right now. So as somebody who's never talked to an agent before outside of your event, and like, what should I expect? If I do have a good conversation, we make a good meet, and they're like, hey, send me first pages. Do I need a budget for this? Like, am I expected to pay this agent up front? Like, what does that relationship work once it's made?
Okay, hang on. Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Do you seriously believe what you just said? Or are you kind of messing with me?
No, I believe it. I believe that I might have to pay somebody before they even will represent me.
No agents charge upfront money.
Okay. See that this is the level of education you're dealing with. And I've been indie publishing for 10 years. Well, I mean, it's a different world, man. Yeah.
Well, going back to Jeff's first point that he said right when we got into this conversation, he's like, people in a group can be so insulated.
Yeah, I don't know anything.
Tunnel vision that they can't even see the forest for the trees. Like, people are always watching whatever cable news station. They can't understand this greater world. And
that's 100% how I feel the author world is sometimes.
Oh my gosh, because that question was so strange. I was like, you don't really know. No legitimate agent charges you any upfront money to consider your work or represent you. They only make money if they sell your book. They make 15% of what you make. Now, if anyone asks you for upfront money, first of all, they shouldn't. They won't. That would
Yeah.
be this rare scammer agent that you're talking about saying,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
representation fee and evaluation fee of $2,100, and you just send it through the Venmo or blah, blah, blah. But like I said, if you got common sense about you, you
Mhm.
understand no agent asks for money up front, and you're using the traditional means to find an agent like Twitter, agent query, publishers marketplace, like we talked about, manuscript wish list. So
Yeah.
you will not have these problems.
Well, I think it gets cloudy because there are like hybrid publishers who are like, oh, I'm going to take on the burden of publishing your book for you. I'm going to do a lot of the upfront work for you, and I'm going to charge you for that. And then I take a much less commission, right? Like, I think that's where it gets cloudy, is that like people in my world, in the indie world, start to confuse like a small publisher or a hybrid publisher with what like an agent would expect. Does that make sense?
Kind of, kind of. But the root of the problem that you're talking, first of all, if you approach a small publisher,
Mm-hmm.
a traditional publisher, a small traditional publisher, they will not charge you any upfront money. The way that they'll be different per se is they'll say something like, we don't pay any upfront money. You get
Mm-hmm.
$0 upfront. However, we'll give you a royalty rate of, instead of the usual 12%, we'll give you 20 or whatever it is. Like that's what a small publisher would do. But there's still no upfront money
Mm-hmm.
because it's in the traditional side of things. And in the entire traditional side of things, from big publishers like Disney Hyperion to medium publishers, the small publishers to the agents that are interwoven in it, there is no upfront money. The only money that you budget is any money that you want to have to pay potentially a freelance editor, someone
Okay.
who's really good at the work. Even I still use freelance editors for the stuff I'm not sure about. Like whenever I'm writing my kidlit books, like it's just one thing where I know I can write the book well, but I don't have 100% confidence. Even I'm still using them. I either pay somebody or we
Mm-hmm.
have friendships, so we have to trade manuscripts. Steve and I did that. But the bigger thing that you touched on, and I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something that indie authors need to understand is that most people who say they're hybrid publishers in the modern world as of 2024 are not.
Mm-hmm.
They are self-publishing services. They
Yeah.
call themselves hybrid because it sounds sexy and it sounds badass, but they're not. They're not the hybrid publishers at all. The hybrid model basically is, we're going to share the publishing cost with you, but in exchange for you bringing money to the table, we will give you a traditional publishing experience, which means we're going to turn away 98% of the books. We're only going to take like 2% of the books. We're going to get those books printed and into bookstores, and we're going to have a publicist that's going to help you get the coverage that you want. And so you feel like, oh, if I can get the traditional publishing experience, being in bookstores, being in the airport, getting a publicist, la da 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 da, I don't mind submitting $5,000 to $10,000 of my own money, and that is fine. But the problem is, those types of successful hybrid publishers, there's like 5 of them in the country. The other 400 that say they're hybrid, they're not. They're just self-publishing services.
Yeah.
And they call themselves hybrid because it sounds cool. And so my guess is that 95 to 98% of the times that your group of writers, indie writers, have said this word hybrid, it's a publisher that is not a hybrid publisher. It is a self-publishing service charging upfront fees to just get your book out there. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to create the book, whatever, it is not hybrid. It's self-publishing. That is the main point where I feel like an indie author, someone who's new, like you said, vulnerable, can get twisted and think that that's not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that perspective is super helpful. I really appreciate that. Talk to me a little bit. So I've got 10 minutes with an agent, and I know we're running short on time. So I'm going to ask you like one more kind of big question. I got 10 minutes with an agent. I'm writing in like a romance genre, which has like very specific tropes.
Sure.
Twofold question. Do I need to acknowledge that I know all those tropes and that I'm hitting all of those with my book? And secondfold, what do I lead that pitch with? Do I lead with like, I've got this amazing character, I've got this incredible theme, or this is the like X meets Y, this is the conflict that I'm driving toward?
I would suggest, since romance is a genre where it's the same story being kind of told over and over again, you are going to lead with whatever you feel like is the most interesting thing.
Okay.
That could be the main character. Like, okay, you're writing a detective. One example I always give at my conferences is that, instead of just saying someone's a detective, maybe you lead and say, although Remy Thibodeau wouldn't consider himself to be the best detective in Louisiana, he would consider himself to be the best blind detective of Louisiana. He's even got business cards saying that same thing in print and in braille. Period. So you're writing a detective, police procedural or whatever. It's been done a million times, been done to death. So you have to pull in something interesting. Like this is the main character, and he's blind, and he's from, he lives in Lafayette, Louisiana. He speaks French. He has braille business cards. He's kind of a character. So I'm going to lead with that. Or versus, something that is really high concept, like there are 6 islands in Hawaii, and every full moon, like someone's killing someone on a different island. So like that's the high concept thing where it's like there's been the first 4 islands and they know it's on the 5th island. They just don't know when. Like that's cool. It's a neat idea. So the point is you lead with whatever you find the most interesting thing to be. And then if it's not a character, if it's like something like the Hawaii thing, if it's not a character, you want to get to the character as quickly as possible, because an agent wants to wrap their head around a character and rooting for them and all that stuff. So you either lead with the character, or you say some cool stuff here, like it's X meets Y, it's Die Hard on the Moon, and then you get to the character. But all roads lead to this. That's what people need to know. And you don't need to explain that you acknowledge and understand the tropes, because in your pitch of explaining this is 7 to 10 lines of what the story is about and the plot and the conflict and the complications, you will explain through what your book is about that it's hitting certain beats and that there are certain tropes.
That's super helpful. Yeah. And I totally see what you're meaning, that like as you explain this story, it's going to be evident that you either know the genre or you don't know the genre.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, this has been fantastic. I'm running out of time, so
we got time for one more if you got it.
Yeah, well, I want you to talk about, like, so if somebody wants to come to the virtual conferences this fall and summer, how do they find them? Do they need to register by geography? Like, what's the best way to go about picking which conference to come to?
Okay, so I plan writers conferences. A lot are in person and a lot are online. Okay, the best way to just find the master list of when and where they are is just to go to writingdayworkshops.com. Just Google search writing day, like daytime, writing day workshops. There's probably a link that Jeff is leaving you in the description of the podcast.
Absolutely.
Go there, and then there's an events page, and it'll show you. And so you'll figure out real quick what you want to do. It's not that complicated. If you want to do something quick, there's an online conference every month with 30 plus agents. If you want to do something in person, you kind of got to look through what's coming up. And if you can't see anything coming up because it's several months away, look to the past. And is there something that recurs in your area? Big cities be recurring, like Philadelphia, Seattle, and Los Angeles. Yes, we'll be back again. But to answer the interesting question that he brought up is, so say there's an upcoming online conference called the Florida Writers Conference, or the the San Francisco Writers Conference. Do you need to be in that geographic area? And the answer is no, absolutely not. You just have to be prepared for that time zone. That's all.
Gotcha.
So, if you live in Florida and you sign up for San Francisco, the classes don't start at 9 a.m. They start at noon, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so do the pitches. That's the only thing you need to worry about. But no, we have people from all over the world coming to the online conferences from Australia. And you think like you are up at like 4 a.m. pitching this agent. You're hardcore. I like that stuff. So no, there's no geographic limitations. The only thing you need to understand is the time zones, which most people do not care about.
Awesome. Well, and like I said at the top, man, your conference was a huge education for me. And like, anybody listening, if you want to like get a picture of traditional world and what it looks like, I super recommend it, because it was great. Like I didn't pitch any agents or anything. I was just meandering around. I learned so much just being present. So yeah, it was good. All right, I'm gonna hit any final thoughts, anything else you want to say before I stop the recording?
No, just if anybody's ever interested to know more about me and the conferences, you can go to Writing Day Workshops, or you can Google my name, Chuck Sambuchino. My website comes up, my social media, so forth and so on. You can get to know me. I'm easy to contact if you ever need to contact me. And to all the indie writers watching, wishing you nothing but great success. So good luck.
You do editing as well. Are you taking any editing clients right now?
Well, I mean, not right this week, but I'm hoping to start again about like July 15th, because I have to take a few months off after a terrible spring. It's a busy spring.
Yeah,
terrible. It's lovely. It's just too busy. But yeah, people can always reach out. They always reach out, and I either say like I'm too busy, or I say like, yeah, I'll edit your query or synopsis or manuscript or book proposal. Here are my rates. Awesome. And we either do it or we don't, and that's cool.
All right. I'm gonna hit stop. We can talk a little bit more.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.